2021 at approximately early in the morning, probably around 2 a.m. According to information that was provided by the Sheriff's Department, Mr. Jones was allegedly
involved in some sort of traffic violation. It is alleged that he dropped his motorcycle, and this is in Victorville, California, and went to a nearby car dealership. Once he went to the nearby car dealership, he was approached by San Bernardino County Sheriff's Deputy Corie Smith, who gave Mr. Smith some commands. Mr. Smith fully complied with those commands. He laid down on his stomach, arms spread, unarmed, no threat to the deputy. When the deputy approached Mr. Smith and kicked him twice in his head, rendering him unconscious. After he was taken into custody, he was taken to get medical treatment, and then taken to the San Bernardino County jail facility. And while he's at the San Bernardino County jail facility, he was approached by authorities and provided with a document. And keeping in mind at the time that he was provided with this document, this was only just a few hours after he had been kicked twice in the head, and asked to, well, coerced actually to sign this particular document while still feeling the effects of being kicked in the head and being confused. Later on, we became aware of the fact that the documents that they gave Mr. Jones was a release for $4,000, not to file a claim against the Sheriff's Department. Mr. Jones at the time was unaware of this, and later on received a copy of this information in the mail. It was actually sent to him. So again, we, as a result of this, we filed a tort claim, which is the way that lawsuits of these natures proceed in police misconduct matters. And once the tort claim has been, the decision is made on the tort claim, we'll prepare whether we want to go forward with a lawsuit if we're not able to settle this matter. What we're asking for, obviously, is for Mr. Jones to get justice for what happened to him. And we also, Mr. Jones is very interested in justice in general for somebody else that may experience this type of treatment that he had experienced. Again, this has been of course, this is an epidemic in this country where we see law enforcement that have been abusing African Americans and other individuals from marginalized communities, and just citizens in general. I mean, this is completely uncalled for, and these are people that are supposed to be protecting us. And what we saw, which was videotape, I think the officer was unaware of the fact at the car dealership there actually was a videotape from a security company that gave this videotape to the watch commander on the evening that this incident had taken place. Just so that I'll let you know that there's actually pending criminal charges against Mr. Jones for felony evasion. There's no other charges at this time. We still aren't quite clear as to exactly what the traffic violation that Mr. Jones was allegedly violating at the time that this traffic stop happened. But we intend to do what we need to do to make sure that Mr. Jones gets justice in this case. And I've also committed myself to assisting Mr. Jones to do whatever we can to make sure that this type of stuff doesn't happen to anyone else. I mean, again, this is a pandemic in this country. There's been way too many incidents of innocent citizens who have been complying with police officers that end up like Mr. Jones being kicked in the head or being physically abused by law enforcement, and it needs to stop. So, is there any questions?
What is Mr. Jones going to be speaking with us, or just ask you?
Just ask me.
Okay. All right. And you're Mr. Ali?
Correct.
Okay. What did he, in hindsight now, what did he think of this this release that he was asked or told to sign? Actually, my question is, what did he think would happen if he didn't sign it?
Well, just keeping in mind at the time that, and just to give a visual of what took place, is that he at this time was under arrest. And again, just keeping in mind also, he had been recently kicked unconscious. He had also had just recently returned from the hospital seeking medical treatment. So there was either he signed the agreement. I think that there was potentially discussions about whether he would be released or not at the time. But to be quite honest with you, we're still investigating that, because we really do not know the individual deputies or the individual officials that were involved in providing this release to Mr. Jones. And also Mr. Jones, because of the effects of being rendered unconscious, there's a lot of things that we need to look into before we can give a definitive answer to that question.
Did he clearly understand what it was he was being asked to sign?
No.
And when did the $4,000 come into the picture?
That apparently was something that was written into the release.
That was in the release. Well, you've got a copy of it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Can you get a copy of that?
I couldn't give it to you at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you see in that video is really shocking, really. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. I was just wondering if there's any way we could get a better idea of what you were feeling in that moment. I imagine that a lot of things were kind of a whirlwind, but just looking back at it, you know, just to face 2 kicks and then have what appeared to be like his knee on your neck. I can imagine that so many things were racing through your mind, and I was just wondering if there's any way we could have someone kind of explain the fear or the chaos behind it.
It pains me. It pains me every time I see it. It pains me every time I see it. I didn't think that would ever happen to me, to be honest with you.
I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes, and I know that's really tough to do because I can't imagine what you were like going through. Yes. But I guess when I saw it and I saw him put his knee on your neck, I was like thinking about George Floyd, thinking about what you were thinking. Yes. Were you thinking in that moment like you might lose your life, or?
Yes. After I saw the video, I was unconscious, so I didn't know that. So after I saw the video, I was thinking the same thing as well. I could have lost my life.
Again, I can imagine just how shocking that would have been watching it back, especially after.
Yes.
So you were trying to surrender, correct?
Yes, I was.
And what did you expect to happen as you began to lay down?
I was expecting to just get arrested, just get handcuffed.
May I ask, did you suffer, like, because it seemed like he kicked you so hard in the head, were your injuries pretty bad?
Yes, I still experience pain, like headaches and just excruciating pain time to time. It's hard for me to eat and to sleep as well. So, like, I got to go on through my life looking back at this every day, pretty much.
And I know that at this point, you know, law enforcement across the country have been accused of doing some pretty bad things, but I mean, I can imagine how this would heighten your concern and fear that there might be people like this just continuing to patrol neighborhoods.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Are you a little worried that this guy could be back in patrol?
Yes, yes, I am. It's crazy that someone like that could still have their job and be getting paid for it, paid leave.
Did the deputy say anything to you before or after he kicked you?
I was just responding to his verbal commands as get on the ground. I got on the ground, as you can see in the video, and I was kicked in the head twice.
There were other deputies that ran up afterwards. Did you hear anyone say anything to the deputy was hitting you?
I was unconscious at the time.
And
Could you tell us, just kind of take us through what happened? The sheriff's department said you guys committed a traffic violation and that you didn't stop.
well, before the incident, you know, and unfortunately because he has not been arraigned on the charges of evading. Unfortunately, you know, he can't really answer any questions about that particular aspect of what was being alleged. But I do want to also make a couple other statements about, you know, something that Mr. Jones mentioned that's really important. I mean, he is a victim of a criminal act. I mean, what happened to him was somebody who he's a victim himself. I mean, that turned in, you know, a law enforcement officer kicking someone in the head you know, twice, and as was mentioned, you know, putting his knee on the back of his neck. I mean, that's horrific to think that someone who's, you know, our safety and our welfare, we trust these individuals, and to imagine that someone would do something like that against someone, you know, Mr. Jones or anybody else. So I just, in the fact that Mr. Jones still was charged with this incident while this deputy, who clearly committed a criminal offense on video, is out on paid leave, is just, you know, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it was just a terrible thing. And I think that we continue, again, as I said before, we continue to see these sort of things in this country. Just so happened, I mean, you know, this was right in front of a video camera. I'm sure the officer had no idea that there was a video camera there. And just imagine if it wasn't there, then we would just, you know, clearly, you know, we see in this county and other counties, individuals are actually charged, you know, for assaulting officers, when in fact these officers are actually, you know, assaulting citizens in our country. And we have to do something to change it. We did get a statement from the undersheriff. We haven't heard anything from the sheriff, but the undersheriff did do a video statement to the public, which seems to me to be something that he read, and it seemed to be somewhat half-hearted. And I think we have to have a culture change in law enforcement. And as I said before, culture change takes place not from the bottom up, but from the top down. We need to start assessing the leadership that we have in these law enforcement organizations. And it just, you know, you mentioned George Floyd. We can't forget the situation with George Floyd, where you had Derek Chauvin, who actually had numerous complaints against him for violating individuals. And in fact, he was a field training officer, and he was training other law enforcement officers. This particular deputy, Corie Smith, has been identified by the department on previous occasions as being a decorated officer. And so, again, this is a culture in law enforcement that has to change, and it's something that, you know, we have to do it, and we have to do it now. I mean, it's gone on way too long. And I've given my, you know, Mr. Jones wants me to help him get justice, but I made a promise to him that we're going to go further than that. We want justice, period. Not just for him, but we want justice for anybody and everybody that's experiencing this type of situation. It's got to stop. And that's what we're committed to.
And Mr. Jones was given a release when he was in jail, and yet we heard this statement that said, look, what our deputy did was unacceptable and should not happen. Do you feel like they're maybe trying to cover things up with that release? I just want to make it very clear.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that to kind of put it in perspective, I think you have to almost visualize sitting in a jail cell. I mean, I'm sure many of you, many of us, I mean, we've dealt in the you know, in the criminal justice system. I was a police officer myself. I've never can imagine that while you are arrested in custody, that someone would walk up to you with a release of liability. I mean, that's almost as bad as the assault itself, you know, and in many ways an admission, especially when you're asking someone who's just experienced some sort of, you know, the trauma that he's experienced, like being kicked in the head. So, and barely conscious, you know, so, that's terrible. I've never heard of that.
Where was he physically in the jail? Was he sitting in the cell when they handed him the?
I think he was sitting in an interrogation room. He was being interrogated at the time.
Has he been charged? I couldn't find him in the. I couldn't find the specific case in the jail records.
He was,
Court records.
well, I don't know if the district attorney's office has filed it,
Okay.
but he was arrested and he did post bond on the charge of felony evasion.
Okay. And so I'm going to be checking back on the case, obviously, and there are a lot of Willie Joneses in there. I want to make sure I have the right one. Is it Willie Jones the third, or is there a middle name? Or?
He's the third. It's Willie Jones the third.
Okay. And sir, what's your current age?
33.
33. And do you have a profession?
Yes, mechanic.
And what kind of a mechanic?
Diesel mechanic.
What?
Diesel.
Mechanic. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I thank you guys for coming out. Did you have a question?
Jones, would you say you have any family members that are paying you to see this video?
Sorry, say that again.
Family members that you would hate to see this video?
Yes, I do.
Do you know specifically like anybody that probably has already seen it?
My mom, my dad, my parents. It pains them as well to see it as well. The rest of my family.
I can only imagine how they did. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.